The Virginia 2000 cold case that shook a community began with a 7-year-old girl who needed medicine to stay alive. Brittany Williams played in the yard on Pinehurst Drive in Henrico County, her laughter echoing despite the AIDS that ravaged her tiny body. She required daily medication, careful monitoring, and above all, protection from a world that could easily overwhelm her fragile immune system. But in March 2000, when social workers knocked on foster mother Kimberly Dawn Cox's door for a routine check, Brittany was gone. Cox claimed she'd sent the sick child to live with 2 women in California who could provide better care. No names, no addresses, no phone numbers. And Brittany's life-saving prescriptions had stopped being filled months earlier. For 25 years, investigators searched, families grieved, and a community demanded answers. When the truth finally emerged, it revealed betrayals that cut deeper than anyone imagined. How does a dying child simply vanish? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. August 1999 painted Henrico County in thick summer heat. On Pinehurst Drive, 7-year-old Brittany Williams sat cross-legged in the front yard, carefully arranging dandelions into a crooked crown. Her dark hair caught the afternoon light, framing a face that held more wisdom than her years should allow. The purple lesions on her arms told their own story. AIDS had marked her before she could understand what the word meant. "Brittany, come inside now," called Kimberly Dawn Cox from the doorway. The foster mother's voice carried an edge that made neighbors glance up from their garden. Cox watched the child with calculating eyes, her expression unreadable as stone. Brittany scrambled to her feet, clutching her dandelion crown. She moved carefully, the way sick children learn to move, conserving energy for what mattered most. At 7, she already knew which battles were worth fighting and which were not. "Can I show you my flowers?" Brittany asked, holding up the wilted crown. Her voice carried the hopeful lilt of a child still believing in small miracles. Cox barely glanced at the offering. "Put those weeds in the trash. Wash your hands." The foster home sat like any other on the quiet street white siding, small front porch, American flag drooping in the still air. But behind its ordinary walls lived secrets that would echo through decades. Neighbors saw what they expected to see: a woman caring for a sick child, doing her best in difficult circumstances. They didn't see the shadows gathering. Brittany disappeared into the house, her crown forgotten on the concrete steps. Cox remained in the doorway, watching the street with eyes that revealed nothing. August heat shimmered off the pavement, distorting everything it touched. Fall arrived in Richmond with its usual fanfare of changing leaves and cooling air. At Henrico Pharmacy on West Broad Street, pharmacist Margaret Webb noticed the gap in her computer system. Brittany Williams' antiretroviral medications hadn't been picked up in weeks. The screen showed the pattern clearly: July, August, then nothing. For a child with AIDS, missing medication wasn't just neglect, it was a death sentence written in silence. Margaret reached for the phone, then hesitated. Foster care cases were complicated. Maybe the child had switched doctors, changed pharmacies, moved to another state. She'd seen stranger things in 20 years behind the counter. Still, something felt wrong. At the foster home, Cox sorted through mail with practiced efficiency. Bills, advertisements, government letters, everything in its proper place. The pharmacy's automated reminder calls went to voicemail, their robotic voices echoing in an empty house. "This is Henrico Pharmacy calling about a prescription ready for pickup for Brittany Williams. Please call us at your earliest convenience." The messages piled up, electronic breadcrumbs marking a trail Cox had no intention of following. Brittany sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a worn book. Her movements had grown slower in recent weeks, her appetite smaller. The bright child who'd arranged dandelions now struggled to hold her crayons steady. "Are we going to get my medicine today?" she asked, not looking up from her picture. Cox didn't answer. Outside, October wind rattled the windows, carrying the first promise of winter. Soon the leaves would fall, covering the ground in shades of brown and gold. Soon many things would be covered, buried beneath layers of time and silence. Late autumn brought questions from teachers at Belmont Elementary. Brittany Williams had missed 15 days since October began. Her desk sat empty during reading time, during art class, during the moments when children her age should be learning about the world beyond their small neighborhoods. Mrs. Patricia Holmes, Brittany's teacher, kept careful records. As November stretched toward December, the attendance sheet told its own story. Present, absent, absent, present, absent, absent, absent. The pattern spoke louder than words. "Has anyone spoken to the foster mother?" asked Principal David Martinez during their weekly meeting. The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke, acrid and unavoidable. Mrs. Holmes shuffled through her papers. I've called 3 times. Always goes to voicemail. The messages I leave are never returned. At the foster home, Cox moved through rooms that had grown quieter with each passing day. Brittany spent more time sleeping now, her small body curled on the living room couch like a question mark. The television played cartoons to an audience of 1, its cheerful sounds echoing off empty walls. The refrigerator hummed its mechanical song, nearly empty except for a carton of milk nearing expiration and leftover takeout containers. Medical bills piled on the kitchen counter, their red stamps marking deadlines that had already passed. Brittany's room had taken on the stillness of a shrine. Clothes hung unworn in the closet. Toys sat gathering dust on shelves. The bed remained made with hospital corners, its surface undisturbed by the restless sleep of childhood. December arrived with cold that cut through windows and walls. In classrooms across the county, teachers prepared holiday programs and sent home notes about winter break. Brittany's desk remained empty, a 7-year-old absence that no one had yet learned to fear. January 2000 brought new millennium fears and old familiar silences. At Belmont Elementary, the post-holiday bustle felt different in Mrs. Holmes' classroom. 23 children returned from winter break with stories of presents and family gatherings. One desk remained empty. The Christmas program flyer still hung on the bulletin board, its red and green border faded from weeks of fluorescent light. Brittany Williams' name had been crossed off the participant list, a single line drawn through her identity like an editing mark on a rough draft. "Where's Brittany?" asked 7-year-old Marcus Thompson, the boy who'd sat beside her since September. His question carried the innocent directness of childhood, cutting through adult evasions with surgical precision. Mrs. Holmes paused at the blackboard, chalk halfway to the word February. How do you explain absence to children who still believe in happy endings? How do you acknowledge fear without naming it? Brittany isn't feeling well, she said finally. The lie tasted bitter, but truth felt more dangerous. At the foster home, winter light filtered through windows that hadn't been opened in weeks. The house held its breath, waiting for something that would never come. Cox moved through rooms like a ghost, her footsteps the only sound breaking the silence. The mailbox filled with envelopes nobody answered. School attendance notices, medical appointment reminders. Social services letters marked urgent in cell red ink. They piled like autumn leaves, evidence of a system that worked in slow motion while life happened in real time. Outside, January snow began to fall, covering Pinehurst Drive in pristine white. Soon everything would be buried, hidden beneath winter's perfect surface. March 15, 2000. Social worker Janet Reed pulled into the driveway on Pinehurst Drive at 2:30 p.m., her Honda Civic crunching over gravel that hadn't been raked since fall. The routine visit had been scheduled for weeks, a standard 6-month check on Brittany Williams' placement. Reed knocked twice, then waited. Through the window, she could see movement inside, shadows shifting behind thin curtains. The house felt different from her last visit in September. Quieter, emptier. Kimberly Dawn Cox opened the door with a smile that never reached her eyes. She wore the expression of someone expecting bad news, but determined to deflect it. "Miss Reed, I wasn't expecting you today. We spoke last week about this appointment." Reed replied, consulting her clipboard. "I'm here to see Brittany." Cox stepped aside, but her body language remained defensive. "Of course. Come in." The living room looked exactly the same furniture, same television, playing afternoon talk shows, same stack of magazines on the coffee table. But something fundamental had shifted. The absence felt like a presence itself, filling every corner with unspoken questions. "Where's Brittany?" Reed asked, scanning the empty room. Cox's rehearsed answer came too quickly. "She's gone to live with 2 women in California. They can give her better medical care than I can provide here." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. You could smell the damage before you saw the flames. "California?" Reed's pen stopped moving across her notepad. "When did this happen?" "A few weeks ago, maybe a month." Cox's timeline shifted, like Sam, unstable under scrutiny. "I'll need their names, addresses, phone numbers, documentation of the transfer." Cox's smile flickered. "I don't have that information with me right now." Outside, March wind rattled windows that had witnessed too much silence. March 16, 2000. Detective Mike Rodriguez arrived at Pinehurst Drive with a search warrant and a sinking feeling in his stomach. 23 years on, the Richmond police force had taught him to recognize the smell of lies, and Cox's story reeked of deception. The warrant gave them authority to search every inch of the property. Rodriguez had brought a full team evidence, technicians, photographers, and 2 cadaver dogs named Rex and Luna. The German shepherds pulled at their leashes, eager to work. "We need to find this child," Rodriguez told his team. The unspoken addition, alive or dead, hung between them like a prayer they were afraid to voice. The search began in Brittany's bedroom. The space felt frozen in time, as if someone had pressed pause on a 7-year-old's life. Clothes still hung in the closet. A half-finished coloring book lay open on the nightstand, but dust covered everything like snow, marking the passage of weeks or months. "How long since anyone's been in this room?" asked evidence technician Sarah Kim, photographing the undisturbed surfaces. Cox watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "She took most of her things to California." Kim's camera flash illuminated the lie. "Children don't leave behind their favorite stuffed animals, their winter coats, their medication bottle." The bedroom told the story of someone who'd never had the chance to pack. Outside, Rex and Luna worked the backyard with methodical precision. Their handlers followed, watching for the subtle changes in behavior that might indicate discovery. Near the storage shed, both dogs began barking simultaneously. "We've got something," called handler Tom Wilson. The team converged on the spot where Rex pawed at the ground, his tail rigid with excitement. They dug for 3 hours. The shovel work revealed only clay soil and old tree roots, but the dog's reaction meant something had been there, or something was still there, deeper than they could reach. As sunset painted the sky orange and purple, the search team packed their equipment. They'd found no body, no burial site, no smoking gun, but they'd found enough absence to fill a courtroom with reasonable doubt. April 2000 brought television lights and national attention to a story that had started in silence. America's Most Wanted host John Walsh looked directly into the camera, his voice carrying the weight of a father who'd lost his own child to violence. 7-year-old Brittany Williams vanished from her foster home in Henrico County, Virginia, Walsh said. Behind him, Brittany's school photo filled the screen, dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that seemed to ask for protection the world had failed to provide. The broadcast reached 18 million households that Saturday night. In living rooms from California to Maine, families watched the reconstruction of Brittany's disappearance. Actors played out the scene: a sick child, a missing guardian, a foster mother with shifting stories. The tip line opened at 8 p.m. Eastern. By midnight, operators had logged 47 calls. Most offered sympathy and prayers. Some reported sightings that would prove false. A few provided information that would keep investigators busy for months. In Henrico County, Rodriguez worked the phones from a command center set up in the police station conference room. Maps covered the wall, marked with red pins, showing every place Brittany had ever been seen. Her world, when mapped, looked tragically small. Home, school, doctor's office, pharmacy. "Detective Rodriguez, this is call center operator 3. We've got a woman from Sacramento who thinks she saw the child at a shopping mall last week." Rodriguez added the information to his growing list. Each call brought hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Finding Brittany alive would be a miracle. Finding her at all would be a mercy. The broadcast aired again on Sunday, reaching millions more. By Monday morning, the story had spread to local news stations across the country. Brittany's face appeared on missing children websites, milk cartons, and flyers taped to telephone poles. But the child herself remained as invisible as smoke, as elusive as a dream half-remembered upon wake. Somewhere, a 7-year-old girl existed in the space between living and dying, between found and lost. Summer 2000 arrived like an unwelcome guest at a funeral, bright and cheerful, while everything beneath the surface had turned dark. The community center on Lakeside Avenue filled with neighbors who'd never needed to speak each other's names before Brittany Williams disappeared. Ellen Morrison, president of the Pinehurst Neighborhood Association, called the meeting to order. Her voice carried the strain of someone who'd stopped sleeping through the night. "We're here because we all feel unsafe," Morrison began. "A child vanished from our street, and we need to talk about what that means for our families." 43 residents had come, more than had ever attended a neighborhood meeting. They sat in folding chairs arranged in uncomfortable circles, their faces bearing the haunted look of people who'd discovered that evil could wear ordinary masks. "Has anyone seen Cox lately?" asked Bill Henderson from the back row. He'd lived 3 houses down from the foster home for 12 years. "She comes and goes," replied Margaret Chen, "but she won't make eye contact anymore, won't wave when I'm in the garden." The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Children who'd once played freely on Pinehurst Drive now stayed in fenced backyards. Parents who'd trusted their neighbors now checked and double-checked locks at bedtime. "My daughter asks me every night if the bad lady is going to take her, too," said young mother Teresa Banks. Her voice broke on the word take. Detective Rodriguez attended the meeting, though he couldn't offer the answers they wanted most. Yes, the investigation continued. Yes, they were following every lead. No, they couldn't say when Brittany might be found. Cox's house sat empty during the meeting, its windows dark like closed eyes. Summer flowers bloomed in gardens throughout the neighborhood, but the woman who'd once watched from her doorway had disappeared as completely as the child she'd sworn to protect. March 15, 2001. Exactly 1 year after Brittany Williams had vanished, the community gathered at Forest Lawn Cemetery for a vigil that nobody wanted to attend, but everyone needed. 57 people stood in a circle, holding white candles that flickered like prayers in the evening wind. Detective Rodriguez had aged in visible ways during the year of searching. Gray touched his temples now, and his eyes carried the weight of questions without answer. He stood beside Janet Reed, the social worker whose routine visit had uncovered the truth everyone wished they could unknow. "We're not here to say goodbye," said Father Michael O'Brien from St. Catherine's Catholic Church. "We're here to say we remember. We're here to say we won't stop looking." Mrs. Holmes from Belmont Elementary read aloud from a letter written by Brittany's former classmates. "Dear Brittany, we miss you at school. We miss your laugh and the way you helped Marcus with his reading. We saved your seat at lunch. We're waiting for you to come home." The letter had been illustrated with crayon drawings, flowers, rainbows, stick figures holding hands around a small girl with dark hair. 7-year-old artists drawing their version of hope. Cox did not attend the vigil. Her house on Pinehurst Drive remained lit, but neighbors reported seeing her silhouette moving behind closed curtains like a figure in a shadow play. As darkness fell, the candles burned brighter, 57 small flames against the Virginia night, each one representing a promise that Brittany Williams would not be forgotten. The wind threatened to extinguish them, but people cupped their hands around the light, protecting what little hope remained. When the vigil ended, they left the candles burning in the cemetery grass. By morning, they would be extinguished, but their purpose had been served. 2002 stretched into 2003, like a river that had forgotten how to reach the ocean. In the FBI field office in Richmond, Agent Patricia Morales opened Brittany Williams' case file for what felt like the 1,000th time. The folder had grown thick with false leads, dead ends, and reports that circled back to the same unanswerable questions. Every few months brought a new development that led nowhere. A girl matching Brittany's description spotted in a Portland shopping mall. DNA proved she was someone else's missing daughter. A phone call from Phoenix claiming knowledge of 2 women who'd taken a sick child. The caller turned out to be mentally ill, creating elaborate fantasies from news stories. Morales spread the contents across her desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to form a picture. Photographs of the foster home, pharmacy records showing the gap in prescriptions, testimonies from neighbors who'd seen progressively less of Brittany through the fall of 1999. The case had been officially transferred to the Cold Case Unit in January 2003. Translation: active investigation had ended, but the file would never close. Brittany's name would remain in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database indefinitely, her face aging artificially in computer programs that showed what she might look like at 8, 9, 10 years old. Rodriguez still called every few weeks, checking for new leads. His persistence had earned Morales' respect, even when she had nothing new to report. "Any word on the California angle?" he'd ask, knowing the answer before she spoke it. "Still working," she'd reply, though they both knew the trail had gone cold before it ever got warm. Outside her office window, seasons changed. Children grew older. Life moved forward everywhere except in the manila folder marked Williams, Brittany, missing. October 15, 2003. The Henrico County Courthouse buzzed with tension as Kimberly Dawn Cox stood before Judge William Harrison for sentencing. She'd been convicted of embezzling $16,247 in Social Security benefits and public assistance payments meant for Brittany Williams' care money collected for months after the child had disappeared. Prosecutor Amanda Lewis addressed the court with barely controlled anger. "Your Honor, the defendant not only failed to protect a vulnerable child in her care, she continued to profit from that child's absence. She cashed checks, collected benefits, and purchased personal items while claiming Brittany Williams was receiving care in California." Cox's defense attorney, Richard Palmer, had argued that his client was guilty only of poor record-keeping and financial mismanaged. Mrs. Cox believed she was acting in the child's best interests by finding her better care. The financial irregularities were oversights, not intentional fraud. The courtroom filled with community members who'd hoped to see justice for Brittany's disappearance. Instead, they watched Cox receive 18 months in prison for theft, a punishment that felt like a traffic ticket when weighed against a child's life. The defendant will serve her sentence and pay full restitution, Judge Harrison announced. However, I want the record to reflect that this court finds the circumstances surrounding the missing child deeply troubling. Detective Rodriguez sat in the gallery, his jaw clenched with frustration. They had Cox on fraud, but fraud wasn't murder. Fraud wasn't kidnapping. Fraud wasn't the crime that had stolen a 7-year-old's future. After sentencing, Rodriguez approached Prosecutor Lewis in the hallway. When she gets out, we'll be waiting. Lewis nodded, but they both knew the truth. Without a body, without witnesses, without evidence beyond reasonable doubt, Cox would serve her time for stealing money, while the greater theft of a child's life remained unpunished. The courtroom emptied, leaving only the echo of justice deferred. April 2004 brought spring rain and false hope to Henrico County. A young girl found wandering in San Diego claimed to remember being called Brittany by caregivers she couldn't describe. She was approximately the right age, showed signs of medical treatment, and spoke with an accent that might have been Southern. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Agent Morales' phone rang while she was reviewing other cold cases, trying to divide her attention between dozens of missing children whose faces stared at her from bulletin boards and computer screens. "We might have her," said Detective Ray Williams from San Diego PD. "Girl's been in the system for 6 months. Says her name is Brittany. Talks about living with a woman who wasn't nice to her." The DNA samples traveled by overnight courier cheek swabs from the San Diego girl compared against hair samples retrieved from Brittany Williams' bedroom 3 years earlier. For 48 hours, investigators on both coasts held their breath. Rodriguez didn't sleep during those 2 days. He sat by his phone, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours earlier, waiting for news that might finally bring peace to a case that had defined his career. The results arrived on Saturday morning. No match. The girl in San Diego was someone else's missing daughter, someone else's tragedy wrapped in mistaken identity. Her name was Jessica Walsh, taken from her home in Oregon 2 years earlier. Finding her was good news for another family, but it left the Williams case exactly where it had been suspended, between hope and heartbreak. Rodriguez hung up the phone and returned to the files scattered across his desk. Somewhere, Brittany Williams remained missing. November 3, 2009. Kimberly Dawn Cox died of heart failure in a Richmond hospital bed, taking with her every secret she'd ever held about Brittany Williams' disappearance. She was 57 years old, survived by no one who would claim her body or arrange her burial. Detective Rodriguez received the call at 6:15 a.m. from the duty nurse at VCU Medical Center. Cox had been hospitalized for 3 weeks with complications from diabetes, but her condition had deteriorated rapidly in the final days. She never asked for visitors, the nurse reported. Never mentioned family. The only person who came by was a social worker from the state, checking on some old cases. Rodriguez drove to the hospital morgue, though he wasn't sure why. Cox's death didn't change the facts of Brittany's disappearance, but it felt like the closing of a book he'd never finished reading. Now the last chapter would remain forever unwritten. The morgue attendant pulled back the sheet. Cox looked smaller in death, reduced to the essential elements of bone and flesh that revealed nothing about the secrets she'd carried. Her hands, folded across her chest, had once signed papers, counted money, and perhaps covered the truth about a missing child. "Any family?" asked the attendant. "None that matter," Rodriguez replied. Cox would be buried in Potter's Field, in an unmarked grave among the unclaimed dead. Her secrets would decompose with her body, leaving investigators with nothing but questions that had already grown cold. Outside the hospital, November wind scattered dead leaves across the parking. Another winter was coming, the 10th since Brittany Williams had vanished. 2010 to 2012 passed like pages turning in a book nobody wanted to read. Brittany Williams' case file gathered dust in metal cabinets, but her face remained alive on computer screens across the country. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children updated her age progression photos annually, showing what she might look like at 18, 19, 20 years old. Web sleuths discovered her story on cold case forums and true crime blogs. Her photograph appeared alongside hundreds of other missing children, each face representing a family's nightmare that had never ended. Brittany Williams missing since 2000. Read the header on helperpage.com, a website dedicated to unsolved disappearances. Below her picture, volunteers had compiled every known detail. Last seen wearing pink pajamas. Required daily medication for AIDS. Foster mother claimed she'd been sent to California. The comments section filled with theories and condolences. Rip, sweet angel. You deserved better. Has anyone checked for burial records in California? The foster mother definitely knew more than she said. Detective Rodriguez, now 56 and graying at the temples, still checked these websites monthly. He appreciated the public interest, even when it led nowhere. Every page view, every shared link, every comment kept Brittany's name alive in a world that had mostly moved on. At Belmont Elementary, Mrs. Holmes had retired, but she still kept Brittany's school photo in her desk drawer. New students filled the classroom where a 7-year-old's desk had once sat empty, but the absence lingered like an echo that wouldn't fade. July 2013 brought the kind of phone call that makes investigators' hearts race and families' hopes soar. A young woman in Sacramento had contacted authorities claiming to be Brittany Williams. She was 20 years old, had vague memories of being very sick as a child, and remembered a woman she called Mama Kim. Her name was Amanda Foster, and she'd been raised by 2 women who'd told her she was adopted from Virginia after her birth parents died. The timeline seemed right. The age matched. Perfect. She even had faint scars on her arms that could have been from medical procedure. Agent Morales coordinated the DNA testing person. After 13 years of false leads and dead ends, this felt different. Amanda's memories, though fragmented, contained specific details that hadn't been released to the public. I remember purple medicine that tasted terrible, Amanda told investigators, and a lady who watched TV all day and didn't like me to make noise. The DNA samples traveled from Sacramento to the FBI laboratory in Quantico. For the second time in 9 years, investigators waited for science to provide answers that detective work couldn't deliver. Rodriguez spent the waiting period reviewing every file, every interview, every piece of evidence collected since 2000. If Amanda Foster was really Brittany Williams, it would mean the greatest miracle of his career. If she wasn't, it would mean crushing another family's dreams while keeping his own case permanently cold. The results arrived on a Thursday afternoon. No match. Amanda Foster was not Brittany Williams. The young woman took the news with grace that belied her 20 years. "I'm sorry I'm not her," she said during the phone call. "I really hoped I could bring her family some peace." Rodriguez thanked her for her courage in coming forward, then returned to his desk and the files that held no answer. 2014-2019 blurred together, like landscape viewed from a moving train. Detective Rodriguez celebrated 30 years on the force, then 35. His hair went completely gray. His joints grew stiff from years of bending over case files. But Brittany Williams remained the case he couldn't solve. New investigators joined the force, eager and optimistic. Rodriguez mentored them, teaching hard-earned lessons about patience, persistence, and the weight of unanswered questions. He showed them Brittany's file, thick with reports and thin on conclusions. Some cases eat at you, he told Detective Sarah Martinez, his eventual replacement. "This one's been chewing on me for 19 years. Technology advanced, cold case techniques improved. DNA analysis became more sophisticated. But without a body, without witnesses, without evidence beyond Cox's lies, the case remained frozen in time." Rodriguez submitted his retirement papers in December 2019. His letter to Chief Thompson included a personal request. "I'm asking that someone continue to check on the Williams case monthly. Review the file. Look for new angles. That little girl deserves an answer, even if I couldn't find it." On his last day, Rodriguez cleaned out his desk and found the photo that had sat there for 2 decades. Brittany Williams smiling at the camera, her school picture from 1999. He traced the edge with his finger, memorizing features he'd studied thousands of times. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring you home," he whispered to the image. He left the photo on Detective Martinez's desk with a note. "Don't let her be forgotten." The case files transferred to Martinez's custody, along with the weight of questions that had outlived the man who'd carried them longest. January 2020 brought a new decade and a new detective to Brittany Williams' case. Sarah Martinez had requested the assignment specifically, drawn by the story of a child who'd vanished without a trace, and a veteran detective who'd never stopped searching. Martinez spread the files across the conference table in chronological order, creating a timeline that stretched from 1999 to the present. 21 years of investigation, false leads, and heartbreak documented in manila folders and digital files. What am I missing? She asked aloud, studying crime scene photographs that had been examined by dozens of investigators. Cox's house on Pinehurst Drive looked ordinary in the pictures, a typical suburban home that had harbored extraordinary secrets. The medical records told their own story. Brittany's HIV required consistent medication, careful monitoring, and immediate attention to any symptom. Without proper care, her immune system would have collapsed within weeks. Martinez pulled up Cox's financial records on her computer. The pattern was clear. Social Security payments continued for months after Brittany's disappearance, along with medical assistance benefits and foster care stipends. Cox had profited from absence, treating a missing child like a business transaction. But profit didn't necessarily mean murder. Greed didn't automatically equal violence. Martinez needed more than financial motive to build a case that would satisfy prosecutors. She picked up the phone and dialed Agent Morales, now stationed in Washington, D.C., but still following Brittany's case. "I'm reviewing everything from the beginning," Martinez explained. "Is there anything you wish you'd done differently?" Morales was quiet for a long moment. "I wish we'd found her body." Without physical evidence, Cox's story, however ridiculous, creates reasonable doubt. Martinez made notes as they talked, adding fresh perspective to questions that had grown stale with time. 2021 marked 21 years since Brittany Williams had disappeared, and Richmond Social Services had transformed their training programs to ensure such a tragedy never happened again. Janet Reed, now a supervisor, conducted seminars for new caseworkers using Brittany's story as a cautionary tale. The warning signs were there. Reed told a room full of earnest young faces. The missed appointments, the evasive answers, the gradual isolation of the child. "We missed them because we wanted to believe the foster parent was acting in good faith." The training manual featured a dedicated chapter, Recognizing Patterns of Concealment. It outlined red flags that should trigger immediate intervention: medical noncompliance, school absences, limited access to the child, and foster parents who deflected questions about the child's well-being. "Every 6 months isn't enough," Reed continued. "Every month isn't enough. When a medically fragile child is involved, contact should be weekly, sometimes daily." The new protocols required multiple verification sources. Foster children's medical care would be tracked through centralized databases. School attendance would trigger automatic alerts to social services. No child would disappear again because different agencies failed to communicate. But protocols couldn't resurrect Brittany Williams. They couldn't undo the damage of 20 years without answers. They could only protect future children from similar fates. After each training session, Reed returned to her office and looked at the photo on her desk. Brittany smiling in her school picture, unaware that she had only months to live. The training was necessary, but it felt like building a dam after the flood had already destroyed the town. Still, if one child lived because of lessons learned from Brittany's death, perhaps some meaning could be salvaged from the tragedy. March 15, 2022. 22 years after Brittany Williams vanished, the Pinehurst Neighborhood Association gathered for their annual vigil. The community had aged children who'd played with Brittany were now adults with children of their own. But the memory remained fresh, passed down like family history from one generation to the next. Ellen Morrison, now in her 70s and using a walker, approached the podium set up in Pinehurst Park. The memorial stone they'd installed 5 years earlier bore a simple inscription: "Brittany Williams, beloved child, never forgot. We gather not in defeat, but in remembrance," Morrison began, her voice carrying across the small crowd of 43 neighbors. "Brittany's life mattered. Her disappearance changed us. Her memory guides us." Father O'Brien, now retired but still attending every vigil, led the group in prayer. "We ask for peace for Brittany's soul and strength for those who continue to seek justice." Detective Martinez attended her first vigil, studying faces in the crowd and listening to stories shared by neighbors who'd known Brittany personally. An older man named Bill Henderson described the little girl who'd made dandelion crowns in her front yard. "She had this laugh," Henderson said, his voice thick with emotion. "You could hear it 3 houses away, made you smile even on bad days." As darkness fell, the crowd lit candles and stood in silent reflection. The memorial stone caught the flickering light, transforming Brittany's name into something sacred and eternal. When the vigil ended, people lingered, reluctant to return to their homes and the ordinary concerns of daily life. 2023 brought the internet age to Brittany's story in ways that previous generations of investigators couldn't have imagined. True crime podcasts featured her case. TikTok videos reached millions of viewers. A Facebook memorial page collected hundreds of comments from strangers who felt connected to a child they'd never met. Justice for Brittany Williams trended on Twitter every March 15th, kept alive by digital activists who refused to let cold cases remain cold. Amateur sleuths analyzed every public detail, creating detailed timelines and maps that sometimes revealed connections professional investigators had missed. Detective Martinez monitored these online communities carefully. Most contributions were well-intentioned but unhelpful conspiracy theories about government cover-ups, accusations against random suspects, and elaborate theories unsupported by evidence. But occasionally, the internet produced genuine leads. A former Henrico Pharmacy employee remembered Cox's behavior when picking up Brittany's prescriptions. A mail carrier recalled suspicious packages being delivered to the foster home. Small details that might not have seemed significant at the time but gained meaning when viewed through the lens of decades. Martinez created a dedicated email address for online tips and assigned an officer to review submissions daily. 90% were worthless, but the remaining 10% deserved investigation. The most touching online contributions came from people who'd been foster children themselves. They shared stories of feeling invisible, of being failed by systems designed to protect them, of understanding Brittany's vulnerability in ways that career investigators never could. She was just a baby, one comment read. She deserved so much better than what the world gave her. September 2024 brought an official acknowledgement that investigators had privately accepted for years. Dr. Patricia Lawson, Chief Medical Examiner for the Richmond region, published a cold case review that included Brittany Williams among Virginia's presumed homicide victims. Based on medical records and timeline analysis, Dr. Lawson wrote, Brittany Williams could not have survived more than 4 to 6 weeks without her prescribed antiretroviral medication. Given that her prescriptions were last filled in July 1999, and she was reportedly missing by March 2000, the probability of survival is effectively zero. The report didn't provide closure, but it offered something equally important: official recognition that Brittany was dead, that her foster mother had lied, and that a crime had almost certainly been committed. Detective Martinez held a press conference to announce the findings. Local news crews packed the police department briefing room, their cameras focusing on a case that had defined a generation of investigators. We're not declaring the case closed, Martinez emphasized. We're acknowledging what the evidence has always suggested, that Brittany Williams was the victim of foul play. We continue to seek justice for her. The medical examiner's report prompted renewed media attention. Documentaries were commissioned. Podcast producers interviewed everyone connected to the case. Brittany's story reached audiences who'd never heard her name, spreading awareness that might someday produce the breakthrough investigators had sought for 24 years. But awareness wasn't justice. Recognition wasn't resolution. Brittany remained missing, her body undiscovered, her killer unpunished. May 2025. The Memorial Garden at Belmont Elementary opened on a Tuesday morning, bright with spring sunshine. Principal Lisa Thompson, who'd never met Brittany Williams but had inherited her story, spoke to an assembly of fourth graders about remembering children who couldn't speak for themselves. This garden is for Brittany, Thompson explained, gesturing toward the carefully tended flower beds that surrounded a small bench bearing a bronze plaque. She was a student here, just like you. She loved to learn, she helped her friends, and she deserved to grow up. The garden featured Brittany's favorite flowers, dandelions, which most people considered weeds, but which she'd treasured enough to weave into crowns. Now they grew deliberately, cultivated and protected in a space designed for reflection and remembrance. Mrs. Holmes, now 82 but still sharp with memory, attended the dedication ceremony. She carried a photo of her former class, 24 7-year-olds arranged in 3 neat rows. Brittany stood in the back, her bright smile captured for eternity. She would have been 32 this year, Holmes told the assembled children. She might have been a teacher herself, or a doctor, or anything she wanted to be. The garden would be maintained by rotating classes of students, ensuring that future generations would learn Brittany's story and understand their role in protecting vulnerable children. It wasn't justice, but it was love made visible in dirt and flowers, and the promise that some Memories refuse to die. Present day, September 2025. Agent Jennifer Walsh, Patricia Morales' successor, submitted her annual review of the Brittany Williams case to FBI headquarters. 25 years after the child's disappearance, the investigation remained officially active but practically stagnant. No new leads developed in the past 12 months. Walsh wrote in her report, social media monitoring continues. Public awareness remains high due to true crime media coverage. However, without physical evidence or witness testimony, prosecution remains unlikely. The case files now occupied an entire cabinet in the Richmond field office. Digital copies were stored on secure servers with backup systems designed to preserve evidence indefinitely. Brittany's DNA profile remained in national databases, compared automatically against unidentified remains discovered across the country. Walsh had inherited more than files and protocols. She'd inherited the emotional weight of a quarter-century of failure. Every agent who'd worked the case had carried Brittany's photo, studied her timeline, and gone to sleep wondering what they'd missed. The investigation has been thorough and professional, Walsh concluded in her report. While we cannot provide closure to the community, we maintain confidence that justice could still be served if new evidence emerges. The report would be filed with hundreds of others, documenting cases that had outlived their original investigators. But unlike many cold cases, Brittany's story continued to generate public interest and media coverage. Somewhere, truth waited to be discovered. March 15, 2025. 25 years to the day after social worker Janet Reed discovered Brittany Williams missing, the community gathered one final time for a vigil that felt more like a farewell than a continuation. The crowd was smaller now. Many original participants had moved away or passed on, but new faces appeared, drawn by podcast coverage or documentary films, or simply the human need to stand against injustice wherever it appeared. Detective Martinez, now a sergeant, lit the first candle as the sun set behind Virginia Pike. We light this candle for Brittany Williams, who deserved to see 25 more years of sunset. The flame passed from person to person, creating a circle of light in the growing darkness. No one spoke for several minutes, letting silence honor what words could never adequately express. Justice delayed is not justice denied, said Father O'Brien's replacement, a young priest who'd learned Brittany's story from his predecessor. Truth has its own timeline, beyond human understanding. As the vigil ended, people extinguished their candles and walked slowly toward their cars. The memorial garden at Belmont Elementary glowed softly under streetlights. Dandelions closed for the night, but ready to bloom again with tomorrow's Sunday. Brittany Williams remained missing, but she was not forgotten. In the end, that might be the only justice possible.